What you are about to hear is a story that will make you question everything you believe about loyalty. This is a story about 40 years of perfect devoted service and how it was erased in less than 5 minutes by a software algorithm. When the new CEO told Helen she was being replaced by an AI, he had no idea that the slow, obsolete old woman he was firing was the only person alive holding the keys to his entire kingdom and the sacred promise she had made to his dying father. Helen was 64 years old. She was not a vice president. She was not a partner. She was an executive assistant, and for 40 consecutive years, she had worked at the same desk for the same company. Helen was not just an employee. She was the company's living memory. She had watched CEOs rise, trends change, and technologies die. She was the invisible engine that made the entire machine run. She knew where every file was, every secret contact, and every preference of every important client, from how they took their coffee to which subsidiary they used for their offshore accounts. She was the foundation. She was loyal. Her loyalty wasn't just to the corporation. It was to the founder, Jason Price Sr. He had hired her when she was just 24. She wasn't just his assistant. She was his confidant, his gatekeeper, and the closest thing he had to a true friend. When Jason Sr. was dying of cancer 6 months ago, he had called Helen to his hospital bedside. Not his son, Helen. His voice was weak, but his eyes were sharp. He made her promise. He asked her to protect the legacy. He asked her to protect the company. And then he grabbed her hand, a desperate fear in his eyes, and begged her to look after Jason Jr., his son. He told her his son was brilliant, but reckless, and that Helen was the only one who could keep the walls straight. Helen wept, and she gave her sacred vow. She would protect his legacy, and she would protect his son. She was about to be rewarded for that loyalty. She had only 1 year left, just 12 more months, and her 40 years of perfect service would result in her full executive-level pension. Jason Sr. died, and the son took over. Jason Price Jr., 30 years old. He arrived from Silicon Valley, wearing expensive sneakers and carrying an aura of absolute arrogance. He was here to modernize the empire his father had built. When Jason looked at Helen, he didn't see loyalty. He didn't see the woman who had protected his father. He saw the gatekeeper. Jason Jr. had always privately hated Helen. For 20 years he saw her as the brick wall that kept him from his father. He remembered, vividly, being 20 years old, begging Helen to patch him through to his father for an emergency business loan for a failed startup. Helen, following Jason Sr.'s strict orders, had politely and firmly refused him. This firing wasn't just business. For Jason Jr., this was a decade-old personal revenge. Helen's execution didn't happen in a polite meeting. It wasn't an email. Jason Jr. walked up to her desk on a Friday at 4 p.m. and asked her to join him in the glass conference room for 5 minutes. This was humiliation by design. He didn't thank her for her service. He didn't acknowledge her 40 years of protecting his family. He told her the company was being streamlined for efficiency and that her position was redundant. They weren't just ending her 40 years of service, they were labeling her obsolete. And then he delivered the final, most brutal blow. Jason smiled, a cold, empty smile, and explained that she was no longer needed because everything she did, all the human memory, all the connections her father had relied on for 40 years, could now be managed faster and cheaper by a new AI scheduling interface. He didn't just fire her. He replaced her with a program. 40 years of human devotion, loyalty, and a deathbed promise erased by a software update. Before we continue this unbelievable story of betrayal, if you love jaw-dropping stories of justice and battles for survival like this, hit that subscribe button right now And let's find out what Helen was packing in her desk. Helen felt the blood drain from her face. The humiliation was so profound, so absolute, that she couldn't breathe. Fired. 1 year before her pension. All her benefits. All her security. Gone. She thought of her promise to Jason Sr. to look after his son. She had failed. Or, she realized, he had failed. Jason told her security would help her pack her personal items, and that she needed to be out by the end of the day. Helen walked back to her desk, numb. The entire office was pretending not to watch the public execution. Security stood nearby. This was the end. She began packing. How do you pack 40 years of your life into small cardboard boxes? 40 years of company pens, coffee mugs, old photographs. She slowly, mechanically, packed the surface of her life. Then she knelt. She pulled the key from her pocket and opened the bottom desk drawer, the one that was always locked. This was the drawer the computers couldn't access. And inside were the books. They didn't belong to the company. They belonged to her. 25 thick, hardcover, black notebooks. One for every year. Some years took two. Her meticulous, handwritten record of 40 years. These were not personal diaries. These were work logs. This was Helen's real memory. Helen had recorded everything. Every meeting she sat in on. Every phone call she patched through. Every secret conversation she witnessed. Dates, times, names. Every secret deal Jason Sr. had made. Every illegal shortcut taken to beat a competitor. Every verbal promise made and then broken. The books detailed every panic attack Jason Sr. had, and every lie Helen had to tell the board of directors to cover for him. These notebooks weren't gossip. They were a 40-year, handwritten indictment of every sin this billion-dollar corporation was built upon. Helen held the last black book in her hand. She thought of her promise. Protect the legacy. She looked at the empty cardboard box. She looked across the office at the new glowing AI logo on the wall. The new CEO had just erased her, but she was holding the archive. She was holding the ledger. She had a choice to make. Helen took the 25 books home. She put the boxes in her small living room. And for 2 days, she sat in the dark. She was in a state of profound shock and grief. It wasn't just the job. It was the humiliation. It was the violation of her promise to Jason Sr. Then the second phase of the attack began. The official termination paperwork arrived by courier. She took it to a lawyer. The lawyer read the fine print and gave her the devastating news. Because she was terminated 11 months before her full retirement date, and because the termination was coded for cause, restructuring, and obsolescence, she was entitled to nothing. Not her pension, not her benefits, just a tiny severance package that wouldn't last 6 months. She was 64 years old and financially ruined. The 40 years of loyalty had resulted in zero. This was no longer just about anger. This was about survival. Her vow to the dead man could not supersede her own life. She needed an ally. She reached out to the only other person Jason Jr. had erased. The company's old chief financial officer, Arthur. Arthur was 70, a traditional accountant, whom Jason had also fired 3 months earlier, calling him too analog, and replacing him with a crypto trading algorithm. Arthur was also bitter, and he was worried. Helen and Arthur met in secret at a quiet public library. She didn't bring all the books. She brought just one. The book from 2010. Arthur opened it. He looked at Helen's perfect, meticulous handwriting. He saw the notes from a budget meeting they had both attended. He looked at the real numbers she had written down. And then he looked at the falsified public numbers the company had filed that same year. He realized what she had. This wasn't a diary. This was the key. They began to work. Helen, the human memory, and Arthur, the numbers expert. They started cross-referencing her handwritten books with the digital archives Arthur still had secret access to. They didn't just find mistakes, they found the conspiracy. The reveal was horrifying. Helen's books proved that the founder, Jason's father, had been running an illegal slush fund for decades, hiding assets offshore to avoid taxes and bribe officials. Helen had recorded the real wire transfers, the ones the official books never showed. This was the legacy Jason Sr. had asked her to protect. He hadn't been asking her to protect the company. He had been asking her to protect his crime. Her sacred promise was a lie. But then came the second reveal. Jason Jr., the new 30-year-old CEO, knew about this slush fund. His modernization and his AI interface were not about efficiency. It was a cover-up. He was using the AI to scrub the digital records, deleting decades of his father's crimes, and he was systematically firing the only living humans, like Helen and Arthur, who knew the real transactions. The AI didn't just replace Helen, it was the murder weapon for the evidence. Helen wasn't fired because she was obsolete. She was fired because she knew. Helen, guided by Arthur, felt one last pang of loyalty, not to Jason, but to the board of directors, the other old men who had worked with his father. She decided to give the company one last chance. She didn't write to Jason. She wrote a formal, polite letter to the entire board. She simply stated that in reviewing her personal archives for her retirement, she had found significant archival inconsistencies regarding the founder's finances, and she urged them to investigate. She was offering them a silent chance to fix it, to give her the pension she had earned, and she would go away forever. The board's reaction was the final betrayal. They didn't investigate. They colluded with Jason. They sent her a response from the company's high-priced law firm. It was a threat. They accused a 64-year-old assistant of attempting to blackmail the corporation. They threatened her with prosecution for stealing company property, her own handwritten notebooks from 1985. This was the ultimate contempt. After 40 years, they were calling her a thief. They ended the letter with an insulting, tiny offer, $5,000, a nuisance fee, in exchange for her signing a permanent ironclad non-disclosure agreement and returning all 25 notebooks. Helen was cornered. But the threats didn't stop with her. The company immediately froze Arthur's severance pay, placing him under internal investigation. Arthur panicked. He called Helen. He told her he had a family, a mortgage. He couldn't fight the entire corporate machine. He told her he was sorry, but he was out. Helen was now completely, utterly alone. Her pension was gone. Her career was defined as a crime. Her only ally had abandoned her. The board was threatening her with jail, and she was bound by a dead man's lying promise. She had absolutely nothing left to lose. The loyalty was burned to ash. The promise was void. She realized they had all made the same mistake. They thought she was just a quiet, loyal old woman. They forgot she had spent 40 years watching the wolves, and she knew exactly how they hunted. She realized she could not fight Jason and the board directly. The press would be silenced. The government would be too slow. She had to use her real power, the invisible power. She decided to attack the corporation, not with a bomb, but with a scalpel. She targeted two entities: the company's single biggest institutional investor, a rival corporation that valued stability, and the company's largest, most important client. Helen didn't leak everything. She was precise. To the rival investor, she mailed a single photocopy of a single page from the 1995 Black Book. That page meticulously detailed the meeting where Jason's father, the founder, admitted that the company's core technology patent was in fact built on stolen research from a competitor. The entire company was a fraud. The investor received the package. They recognized the handwriting. They recognized the secret. They began to mobilize. The board of directors heard a rumor about the investor. They panicked. Jason Jr. convinced them it was just the senile old woman and that she could be bought. They doubled down. They sent their lawyers to Helen's apartment with a new offer. $100,000. A bribe. They thought this was about money. They still didn't understand who they were dealing with. This new, escalated insult was their final mistake. Helen, seeing they had learned nothing, refused the money, and she activated her second attack. She mailed 2 pages from the 2010 Black Book to the CEO of their biggest client. Those pages proved, with dates and wire amounts, that their massive, multi-billion-dollar contract had only been secured because Jason's father used the illegal offshore slush fund to pay a massive bribe to that client's predecessor. Their entire business relationship was based on a felony. All of this happened silently. Jason Price, the 30-year-old CEO, thought he had won. He had crushed the 2 old employees. His digital transition was complete. His secrets were scrubbed. He flew to the Global Tech Summit in Austin. This was his crowning moment. He was the keynote speaker, set to deliver a massive presentation about his new AI efficiency model. The climax happened while he was on stage. Jason was in the spotlight, speaking to 10,000 people about the future of automation, about replacing obsolete human memory with perfect algorithms. At that exact moment, the rival investor, armed with Helen's undeniable proof of patent fraud, announced a hostile takeover bid, claiming the current leadership was fraudulent and the stock was worthless. Simultaneously, the company's biggest client received Helen's package. Seeing the undeniable proof of bribery, their lawyers immediately announced they were pulling their multi-billion-dollar contract, citing fraud, and launching their own lawsuit. While Jason was on stage, boasting about his new AI, the news alerts hit the wire. The company's stock evaporated in real time. It went into freefall. The phones of the board members in the front row began to vibrate off the tables. Jason's speech faltered. He looked down at his own smartwatch. He saw the stock ticker, a sheer, vertical red line going straight to zero. His entire empire, his father's legacy, was wiped out in 9 minutes by a handwritten note. The board turned on him instantly to save themselves. By the time Jason Price walked off that stage, he had been fired. The AI couldn't save him. The company collapsed. It was acquired in the hostile takeover by the rival corporation. The first thing the new owners did was hire Arthur, the old CFO, back, asking him to open the real books and find all the other crimes. The new owners needed the rest of the archive. They knew Arthur didn't have it. Helen did. They contacted Helen. She was no longer the obsolete assistant. She was not the crazy old woman. She was the most powerful person in the company. She agreed to turn over the remaining 24 black books, the complete corporate history, in exchange for 3 things. 1, her full 40-year pension, paid out in a single lump sum, retroactively, plus punitive damages for the fraudulent termination and legal threats. 2, Arthur's pension restored with interest. Loyalty, she proved, was a two-way street. 3, a massive, 8-figure donation from the new company to fund a national retraining and placement center for obsolete workers over the age of 50. The new owners agreed without hesitation. The last time anyone saw Helen, she was not at a desk. She was sitting on the terrace of a small villa, overlooking the ocean. Finally, truly retired, she received a small package in the mail. Inside was a brand new, empty, black hardcover notebook and 1 expensive pen. It was from Arthur. There was a note attached. It said only, "Just in case." Helen smiled. and she closed the cover.